Okay, and welcome to the Jack Hopkins Show podcast. And I have back with me today Stephen Cash, who most of you watching will have seen before because he's been on the podcast before, and you no doubt gained a great deal of insight. And that's what's going to happen again today because Stephen is here to talk to us about something that is critically important, more important perhaps than it's ever been in most of our lifetimes. And so welcome, Stephen.
Yeah, it's great to be back, Jack. Thanks for having me. I'm sorry that we have to keep talking about all these things that are so terrifying, but it's good to talk to you, and I'm
And
happy to be speaking to your audience.
likewise, it's always a pleasure to communicate with you in any format. So you are a wealth of knowledge and experience, and you are also connected to what I would consider a massive number of people with similar knowledge and experience that you probably, like most of us, just kind of on a higher level of skill, uh, never wanted to ever imagine having to pool these people together for something like this with the steady state.
No, that's exactly right. It's sad. I mean, I like a lot of these people. I've worked with them, but I would much rather be exchanging pictures of our kids and grandkids over
Sure,
a year
sure.
than being back in some ways back on mission. This is not what we thought we'd be doing. It's terribly sad.
Yeah, yeah. You've been busy uh, lately, really busy, and doing some wonderful things. And I know I've been trying to get as much of it posted and shared as possible, and asking my followers to do the same because right now, well, I'm going to reserve my comment. Let me ask you, how critical what at how intense and critical is this very moment that we are in right now in terms of our democracy?
As critical as I think it's ever been since the Civil War. More critical than it was when I talked to you last, which I think was around 6 or 8 weeks ago.
Right?
The march towards authoritarianism has sped up. It's accelerated in significant ways. We're in grave danger.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's important, while I know it scares people, while I know it stirs anxiety and fear in people, I'm a believer that it is ever critical for people to know. We can deal with our emotions, we can deal with our anxiety and our fear. But what we don't have a history of dealing with very effectively is an absence of knowledge, because when we are missing that piece, horrible things can go on. And many would argue horrible things are going on right now, to which I think we would both agree. But neither you nor the group that you are associated with, the steady state, I don't think anybody there believes that it's too late to do anything. Is that
Absolutely
fair
not.
statement?
It is not too late. That's what animates us. I've gotten a lot of comfort, believe it or not. I re-listened to Winston Churchill's On the Beaches speech. As bleak a period as you can imagine in our friends and allies in Great Britain's history. Um, uh, uh, More bleak than what we're facing. They were about to lose the war. And you listen to that speech and you realize the incredible depth of strength that can be pulled from inside a people. It was our allies, Great Britain. We need to think about it a little bit that way here. But and maybe it's not justified, but I have never-ending optimism that the American people will understand what's going on and take action. And they're starting to. It's going to be hard. And one of the points of that speech by Winston Churchill is he didn't pull punches, and he answered your question, which is, or addressed your concern that ignorance is dangerous. He didn't pull any punches. He made it really clear that the Brits were in a terrible, terrible place. He wasn't saying, "Oh, we're about to win this war." He laid it out,
Sure.
and he helped the British understand the threat that they were facing, and they rose to the occasion. I think the American people will rise to the occasion. We've
I,
done it
I believe
before.
I believe that as well. And one of the areas of focus for me is that so much of our future relies upon what goes on between these two things on the side of our head. Um, the mental attitude and the belief systems that we operate from right now, I believe will play a huge part in what we are able to accomplish in terms of the things that I think you are going to lay out today.
Mhm.
Uh, because when this goes, when the will to do those things goes, that's really the only time in my mind that it's over. As long as you can stay in touch with this and not allow it to run you, but govern it, eh, then anything else that's laid out can probably be accomplished. Is that kind of how the steady state approaches it?
Yeah, I mean, it's a mental exercise. This is about turning one's attention to an area that you probably haven't thought about much. Probably didn't have to think about it much. Those of us we took civics in high school, I hope. But, basically, life went on in the United States, and you didn't really have to pay that much attention to how it works. For those of you who are listening and not watching, Jack was pointing at his head, and he's exactly right. It's changing what's inside there, changing the framework, changing the frame of the picture, and if a lot of it's learning. I joke that, you know, who knows anything about the Anti-Deficiency Act? And most people wish they never heard of the Anti-Deficiency Act, and it's a lot to expect of people to learn about it. But you have to now. It's an important law. The appropriations clause in the Constitution. From our world, when we talk about the security services, what does the intelligence community do, and why are they so dangerous? It's not a Tom Cruise movie, and so there's a learning curve here. But I think the hardest mental exercise is not just accumulating facts, and I'm going to certainly do my best to explain what I know, and I hope people check me out. Don't take my word for it. But it also, I said, change the frame. Um, we've been really lucky in the United States that worrying about things like executive overreach bordering on autocracy and becoming autocracy isn't something we really had to think about in our day-to-day life. We thought about it at the edges, hypothetically, the civil liberties community, and frankly, the Republican Party for a long time thought a lot about uh, the government doing too much or destroying the balance of power in a checks and balances system. But it wasn't really happening. None of the presidents did it, except really on the edges. If you look at the presidents who pushed hard, Richard Nixon, uh, Franklin Delano Roosevelt during the war, um, it's small change compared to this, and uh, it doesn't have the across the board effect on the structure within which we're working. So I think you're right to point at your head, but we have to get out of that idea that you don't have to worry about that kind of thing. Dictators and autocrats, that's something that happens in sub-Saharan Africa, in Eastern Europe, in countries in Asia, in South American countries. It doesn't happen here. I don't have to worry about it. Unfortunately, not so true anymore.
During your career, and I know we touched on this in our last episode that we did together, but for anybody that's just joining new or this is the first time listening, during your career, Was there anything that even remotely approached this in in the United States in terms of, you know, coming from our own White House?
Not even close. And I'm gonna argue with myself for just a second there. At the time, it felt very important when we were exploring what the executive branch can and should do in the face of international terrorism, Al Qaeda and then ISIS. Uh, and it seemed like those were efforts that could hurt the structure of American democracy. And you know something? We were wrong. People who were thinking that. And now seeing it in the context we have now, um, it was very, very different. And there are a couple of things that makes it really different. A lot of us disagreed with the Bush administration on a lot of issues. I worked for a Democratic senator at the time, but I can tell you, we never doubted that George Bush cared deeply about America and about our safety, and he was doing his damn best to marshal the forces of the United States to keep us safe. We had lots of policy disagreements on how to do that, but there was never a question of whether we were all on the same side.
Sure.
It was a family dispute. We're all Americans. We all want to keep Americans alive. How do you go about doing that in an appropriate way? Lots to discuss. I mean, weren't simple questions. Don't get me wrong. Fundamentally different than what we're facing now. This is not
Yeah.
an argument about how to protect America. It's an argument about whether we want to have an America that we've had for more than 2 centuries.
And that is, I'm glad you stated it like that because that's a vast difference. I don't think and when I say this, I don't think it's because people, aren't capable or they're ignorant or too stupid to understand. I just think sometimes in this fast-paced world that everybody is living in and, you know, let's face it, a family of 4, you've got kids dealing with schoolwork, and you've got groceries, and you got dogs. You've got the everyday things in life that you have to continue doing, and sometimes that leaves very little time for staying up on what is actually happening or even reading about historical content that's relevant to today. But I with that said, I don't think the average person realizes just how different those 2 things are, and one reason I say that is occasionally people who know that I was a Republican for, almost 5 decades, will point out to me things about the Bush administration. And in doing so, that signals to me that, okay, we can have that conversation, but I don't think you understand how different that was than this is. And I think the example that you gave, that you never once questioned whether President Bush loved this country and had this country's best interest in mind. Uh, Not only are we right to question whether that's the case with this president, I would argue that anyone still believing that he does have this country's best interest in mind has probably had their head buried for a while now.
You know, in some ways, it's a hard thing to talk about. And the reason why it's hard is because the difficulty in understanding what President Trump says, what he believes, the incredible disassociation, at least as he talks, from reality, makes it hard to assess what he really believes or what he really thinks. And I think it's a fool's errand to try to come up with this psychological profile of President Trump. And you don't really need to. You listen to his words and you compare them to reality. Portland hasn't burned to the ground. It's just not true. There was a No Kings rally, and between 5 and 7 million people showed up. It's just simply not true that it was smaller than his his birthday parade. And I could go on, just sort of it's not connected to reality. So it makes it a little difficult to assess where he's coming from. So I don't know what he really thinks. It's beyond me to make that judgment. But I think you're right that it is hard for Americans to get their heads around, going back to pointing at your head, what's going on here. And we have to recognize that most Americans are going to work every day and working really hard to put food on the table and get their kids to soccer practice or football practice and all of that stuff. And the problem you have is that keeps you insulated from a growing autocracy until it doesn't. And that's what we've seen overseas. Well, you're busy working in your workshop or making shoes or driving a cab or pr- practicing medicine in a Russia or a Serbia until they shut down your practice or take away your cab or there's a knock on the door or your kid is in jail. And then suddenly it's very different. And we have to get our arms and our heads around that and figure out what we can do and what's realistic to do. It's going to be a hard slog, and we're heading into a critical period. I mean, we're about to hit the 1 year out from our midterm elections. My personal view is that's going to be some sort of waypoint in this journey, either to autocracy or towards, and then turning around. And that's where we'll really know whether we're turning around. And we really have to focus on the next year. And that's one of the reasons why the steady state has been doing what it's been doing lately. And I know we'll talk a little bit about the assessment that we issued. I guess it's now 2 weeks ago, week and a half. I've lost track of the time. Um, and the concerns that have arisen in just the last week or two as the president has ramped up behavior that more and more is hitting those indicators that we talk about in that assessment. And I do hope we'll have time to go into that in some detail. But we 2 days ago, we had the story that Jonathan Landy from Reuters broke on the Interagency Weaponization Working Group, which the way his sources tell it, and he's a great reporter, looks like our own little intel-based KGB looking for opposition. We have the president announcing that he is going to essentially ask himself to pay himself almost $250 million under the Federal Tort Claims Act, which, by the way, does not cover anything that he's talking about here. But he's, as he said, the president, and he seems to be very confident that he'll be paid that money, and he will. I mean, the confidence is probably not misplaced. We have the destruction of half of the White House complex in the face of a complete lack of authority to do that. Ironically, during a shutdown, we have a willingness to pay those federal employees that he wants to, including the contractors building his ballroom, at a time that, according to the Constitution and the law, there are no appropriated funds for it. And he doesn't seem to care. So this is, the last week has been pretty brutal. And I'll add the indictment the week before of James Comey and Letitia James, cases that I think and hope federal district court judges are going to dismiss, as they should be. But it doesn't really matter. It means that you can be swept up and be facing a federal indictment that could land you in jail for many years. That would bankrupt most people.
Sure.
And it's terrifying. And it's intended to instill fear. Somebody was asking me, well, they can't arrest everyone. And I pointed out, they don't need to arrest everyone. And the example I gave is, I said, it's like the way the police deal with speeding on a highway. They don't have to catch everybody who's speeding. They don't even have to catch everybody who's speeding a lot. What they have to do is they have to catch enough people and let you see them on the side of the road behind the with the trooper behind them.
Yes.
So you slow up a bit. So the number of people on 95 who are going 75 miles an hour, which they're not supposed to do, is much, 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 much smaller than the number of people who are being pulled over on 95. I know you have a nationwide audience. If you don't know, 95 is our main highway here on the East Coast.
Right. Yeah.
It's not the I-5 in California, and so far we don't have artillery rounds going over us,
For
but
sure.
other than that, I think
Right.
we're okay. It's designed to instill fear. And it's funny that I use 95 because the I-5 incident is another example. The Marines don't need to train by lobbing shells over the
No,
major highway
no.
in Los Angeles. That was a demonstration of why you should be afraid of us, why you should not resist, why you should shut up and take your kid to soccer and don't think about it, why you should just go to work and keep your mouth shut. Now, I think the error is there. You know, when push comes to shove, Americans don't keep their mouth shut. And I'm heartened by that. Historically, I'm heartened by that. Sometimes it takes a lot to get us off the couch and out from in front of the TV. But when push comes to shove, we show up, we enlist, we help people in distress, we vote. And that's why I'm still doing this every day and I'm not curled up on the couch in a ball.
Right.
Um, So where do you want to start on sort of what we've been doing? I mean, I'm happy to go into some of the
You know,
details
I
and help out on that.
I want to I want this episode to just be a vehicle for you. I mean, I'm on this end, and I might have an occasional question for you, but since you are part of this process that you've been engaged in and know it far better than I want you to just feel free to start where you would start talking about it. And
Let me talk about this assessment that I've mentioned before, and it's been distributed on the social media, but I think it's really important. And I think it will help if I explain why we did this and how it came to be. So since basically the beginning of the administration, the steady state has been saying just a couple of basic things. And the most important is we are facing an existential threat. And we've been talking about it. I was with you on your show, talking about it, exactly that. And sometime in the summer, we realized, a bunch of us are actually former professional intelligence analysts. And in that world, you can sit around and talk about what you think the analysis says, and you can, sort of yammer away over beers or coffee or in CIA world, in your behind the fence line. But the profession says if you think there's a threat, you can't just talk about it. You have to put on your professional hat. You're an intelligence analyst. You've been trained in and I'll use some jargon here and I'm happy to explain it, what we call analytic tradecraft. It's a pretty rigorous way that professional analysts, not only at CIA, but at DIA, at NSA, at State Department's INR, apply. And there's schools they go to, and there's training they get. It's a way of thinking. It's a way of writing. It's very collaborative in the Intel community. Generally, it's almost always a team sport. It's one reason we don't have authors' names on it. It's partly because we're concerned about their safety, but it's also the tradition in the intelligence communities. You don't have an author's name. It's written by an institution. And that means a lot of pounding on the table and yelling at each other in conference rooms and
right.
hundreds of drafts being fought over. So we're in the middle of the summer and we say, we've been telling everybody it's this, you know, existential threat. We're intelligence analysts. So we need to sit down, roll up sleeves, get to work. So we assembled a working group of around 10 analysts. And every time I say analysts, I really mean former analysts. Nobody's working for the government anymore. And we said, okay, how do we do this as if we were back at work at CIA or DIA and NSA, applying that rigorous tradecraft, but instead of looking at overseas, at looking at governments and dictators and autocrats overseas, addressing, here's another piece of jargon, KIQs, key intelligence questions. That's how the customers of intelligence get the analyst doing something. Basically, the president or a senior secretary or the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff or even Congress says, here's a key intelligence question I have. Um, what is Putin going to do about the Donbass next week at this meeting? That's a key intelligence question. So we posed some key intelligence questions to them, which is essentially, do we see a significant backsliding from democracy towards autocracy? And if so, what are the indicators of that? Those are the key intelligence questions. And we sort of wound them up and set them to work. We did another thing that the intelligence community does. And by the way, hopefully this is going to help some people thinking about the various reports about the Russia analysis and why Tulsi Gabbard does not know what she's talking about, which, which is when analysts go and analyze something, they're tasked by the consumers. In that case, President Obama, who said, I want a report. I want you to look at everything because a new president's coming in, Donald Trump, first term, and I want him to have your best analysis of what and what didn't Russia do. And off they went. That's not interfering in intelligence analysis. That's called tasking intelligence. So in my exalted role as executive director, I tasked the analysts, and I'm not an analyst. I come out of the ops side. And so I said, we're going to do it by the rules. So here's the key intelligence question. Go off and write. And I don't want to even read what you're writing until you're pretty much done. And the only thing you're going to hear from me is annoying emails and telephone calls asking you if you're done yet, which I did. Yeah, I was a pain in the ass. What can I say? And they came out with the product, and it looks and feels and reads a lot like an intelligence community product, what's called a finished intelligence piece. And that means a finished intelligence piece means analysts have taken all the data. Now, in CIA world and the rest, in real times, that data includes highly classified stuff, secrets that have been stolen from our adversaries. We didn't do any of that. You don't need to with this administration. It basically tells you what we're doing, but we wouldn't have done it anyway, because we're not here to spy on people. We've put aside those of us who were on the collection side. We're not doing that anymore. And America doesn't need that. And so now we had an analytic piece. And if you go on the DNI's website, you'll see occasionally they publish an analytic piece unclassified for the public. You can take a look at them, and it will look really familiar. It will look a lot like what we wrote. Same terminology, same structure. We talk about the key findings. We talk about a scope note. That means telling the reader, here's what we were asked to do. So I'm looking at this. I'm not looking at that. And this is why. And we talk about what the framework was in which we drafted this. So we now have this piece. So who, in normal times in the intelligence community, I said the customers, this is in the statute, by the way, are the president, National Security Council, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and the combatant commanders, the Congress, and senior secretaries and executive branch officials. Well, we have a slight different thing. I don't think anybody in the executive branch is interested in our analytic. Congress, I am hoping is. It's going to be one of my asks for your constituents, your listeners. But the real consumer, Jack, it's you. And it's all the people who listen to your podcast. And it's all those people across the country who we're counting on to change the framework and get smart and take action. It's Churchill's speech about fighting on the beaches. We're describing the Germans, but it's 80 years later. So it's an easy to read, at least the beginning's easy to read. It's 27 pages. Here's the dirty little secret. You don't have to read the 27 pages. You read the executive summary. And I hate to tell you, even in the real life, in the executive branch, Most intelligence consumers read the executive summary, or they have their staff read the executive summary and then give them a summary. Um, I shouldn't have said that because it really pisses off intelligence analysts who hours and hours writing a long document. But it's pretty clear. And what do you do with it? Well, first thing, read that executive summary. You think we're right? Great. You think we're not right? Check out why. Actually, I actually answer DMs sometimes, as much as I can, on social media. Tell us where we were wrong. Tell your newspaper where we were wrong. If you think we're right, same thing. If you think there's something we missed, let us know. We will probably be doing follow-up pieces, probably smaller pieces that fit into the structure. So let me take a little bit of a digression here and explain the structure. Another piece of intelligence jargon, indicators. Interesting history here. That term sort of comes out of Cold War analysis, where we were sort of in a standoff with Soviet forces. And a big key intelligence question, the one that we really were worried about, is what will it look like before the Soviets decide to launch a war? We'd like to know, because remember, a lot of the intelligence community was structured after Pearl Harbor. You do you do not want your indicator of an enemy attack being bombs dropped on your fleet.
Right.
That's not a good indicator because it's pretty much too late. We don't want to make that mistake. So people started thinking in an orderly fashion. How would we know when the Soviets are going to, for instance, move their troops into and through the Fulda Gap, which would have led them into West Germany? It's the place that a land attack in the West would have probably happened. We'd figured that out. And so we started thinking in an orderly way about indicators. And so what would be the indicators? Well, we start hearing radio traffic intercepts about we need more gasoline stockpile, or they call up auxiliary troops. There's probably a apocryphal story that the Russians did the same thing to us. And supposedly, I hope I didn't tell the story when we last talked.
I don't think so.
So supposedly the Russians would watch, or maybe even had assets in the few pizza stores around the White House, because their theory was if we were gearing up to do something, everybody would be working late, so they'd order pizzas. So if you counted the number of pizzas that get delivered to the old executive office building and the Pentagon at 9 o'clock at night on a Wednesday, and it suddenly spikes, you send a cable back to Moscow and you say, I'm not sure what they're doing, but they're doing something. That's an indicator.
Fascinating.
So we took that idea, and we didn't really need to make this up because we'd used this before. There are indicators of growing authoritarianism, and they fall into a couple of categories, and we sort of used those categories. And this is what gives me the opportunity to sort of walk a little through the report. So what is it when an autocrat is becoming an autocrat? Before he takes over and it's over, what would you see? Well, you would see pressure on the legal system and the judiciary, because it's hard to be an autocrat when the courts and the lawyers are saying you can't do stuff. Second, you will see pressure on the media, and in fact, the entire information infrastructure. The people who tell you stuff, major media, minor media, new media, non-traditional media, podcasters, but also disinformation coming from the autocrat line, basically. You'll see pressure on academia. Nothing pisses off autocrats more than a vibrant college and university campus, because that's a place that people spend their time thinking critically, speaking critically, writing critically, and hopefully have the skills to do both those things well. You don't need those people around. Elections. You need to take control of elections. So you start doing things like, I need all the election lists. I need to put my people in charge of those elections. You mobilize the forces that had been used externally to keep you safe, meaning the intelligence community, the Department of Defense, and internally secure against, for instance, criminals, so law enforcement. The guys with guns and the guys who know how to do spying, you get them and you turn them inwards against your enemies. And finally, you got to do something about the legislature. You have to sideline. You take those categories and you start looking. What did Trump do? Is he doing what Orban did? Answer, yes. Orban did what he's doing on the media. In fact, what makes this a little easier is Trump says publicly over and over again that he thinks Orban is great, and the way he did this was fabulous. So he, I think, agrees with the same indicators we do. He just sees them as indicators of something good.
Right.
Um,
Right.
and so sort of did that. And that's what the report is. And what does it conclude? You'll see some more jargon. Some of the things we conclude with high confidence, some with medium confidence. And that's really a way that analysts talk about, as the name suggests, how confident they are about their conclusions. So I have high confidence that the weather is going to be nice tomorrow. I read the weather report. I've looked at the data. I have high confidence. I have medium confidence that it's going to be nice over the weekend. Same weather report, but 3 days out, who knows? I have low confidence that it's going to be nice 3 weeks from now. I have almost no data on it. So that's the kind of thing they think about. And so if you look at the report, there's a nice little appendix at the back, which we made that up. You don't really have that in many Intel products, which says how to read this report. Things of the jargon, and we actually have a little very short. You want to learn more? Click on this link, and here's some good stuff to read. And what's different here is our customer isn't the traditional Intel customers, people who have been reading this stuff forever. It's the people who are going to listen to you and I talk. It is the Congress. They're the last people left standing who can do something about this. And so we need them to think about this report because they're not going to get it from any place else. Nobody else. The executive branch is not going to put this together. Not going to happen. They're not going to do hearings and put together a report. It's not going to happen. So what we need is people to take the report, call up their member of Congress, and say, have you read this report? Or you're going to talk to a staffer. Has the senator or has the representative read this report? We think it really makes sense. What's he or she going to do about it? Is he asking questions about it? Same with your local papers. New York Times, Washington Post, CNN, NBC, no problem. We're all in the sort of inside the beltway. Everybody sees
Sure.
everything. Is the Des Moines Register? Have they looked at this? Has the St. Louis Post-Dispatch? Do I have that right? I think I have that
Yes.
right.
Yes. Yes.
Are they looking at it? And they should be. And local politicians, people running for office, governors should be thinking about this because it affects them too. Very important. So this is a keystone document. It's the steady state using its skills in a rigorous way to say, hey, listen to us, but check under the hood. And that report's under the hood. So take a look and see what's there. So that's the report. It's available. We have it on all the social medias. I know you helped us on that. The more people who read it, it would be great. And frankly, people who are Trump supporters, MAGA, read it. I've gotten some comments back. Some of them are not very nice. But I'm hoping it makes them think also.
Yeah.
So
And can
that's the
we
report.
let's right now, because this is so important, I think, uh, tell people who are listening, and we'll do this again later. Uh, Tell them where they can find you, they can find the steady state, and where they can access these things.
Okay. So we put everything on our website, www.thesteadystate.org. Be careful. Steady state means something in abstract economics, and you may find yourself looking at a website that you really won't want to look at. It will make your head hurt, but it has a lot of graphs. We have a Substack. We also put our things on Substack. It's under the steady state. We're active on Blue Sky. We're active on Twitter, and they all link to each other. We're starting to get active on TikTok, which is making my two kids laugh because there's their dad on TikTok. I'm not quite used to it yet, uh, but I'm getting there. Uh, so all of the so it's easy to get, and if you need a copy of the report, write to contact@thesteadystate.org, and we'll get you a copy of the report in PDF format. You can download it too, but we'll do our damnedest to answer anyone. Feel free to send it on to whoever you think. And if it may be your very angry uncle who you're going to have to sit with at Thanksgiving and have the arguments, send it to them in advance of Thanksgiving and say, if we're going to talk about Trump, read this first. You can have it right next to the turkey if you print out all 27 pages. It's just going to make it a real pleasant Thanksgiving.
Right.
It is an important document. There will be more. We're going to try to bring those analytic techniques. And I want to outline one other thing. There's a phrase used in it which is really important. It's called competitive authoritarianism. And that's coming out of the political science world in academia. It's used by intelligence analysts as well. Let me explain what that means. You used to have old-fashioned dictators. They sort of were a little bit more like Nero and Caligula and kings. Absolute monarchies, absolute dictators. What I say goes. We don't have courts. We don't have a parliament. Whatever it is, it literally is old style, guy banging the table. You're going to do this. That sort of went out of style in the 20th century. It doesn't really exist. Even our worst of the worst from the 20th century, particularly in the developed world, Hitler, Mussolini, Stalin, they weren't like that. They actually continued to have legislative bodies, courts, laws, regulations. The way to think about it is those laws and regulations are sort of, and picture one of these science fiction movies where you have the guy who's there and he gets invaded by the alien being who takes over his body. The body is still there. The arms of the law enforcement world, the head of the legislature, the legs of the judiciary, and the other leg of the media, it's all there. But it's not running on its own. It's been taken over. And it's running to support the leader. So we have elections. There's still elections, but the leader wins. We know he's going to win. We have courts, but the courts do what the leader wants. We have a legislature. The legislature meets. They have a nice chamber. They keep their fancy building, but they vote for what the leader tells them to vote. The media reports, but the media reports what they're allowed to report. How do you get to take over the body like that? Well, all those indicators, you see where I'm going here,
Yes.
they match up. So I want the media to do what I want. I tell them I'm going to take away their FCC license if they don't, or I'm not going to allow for the merger, or I'm going to make them worry that their studio is going to be firebombed by the many people I pardoned for doing things like this.
Sure.
And that, by the way, another thing we saw today with the pardoning of a billionaire cryptocurrency magnate who also happened to have done a lot of business with Donald Trump and gave him a lot of money. The message is pretty clear. If you're on my side, you will not be prosecuted. He famously said could shoot somebody in the middle of Fifth Avenue. What he's really saying now is not only can I shoot somebody in the middle of Fifth Avenue, my friends can shoot people in the middle of Fifth Avenue too.
Right.
And my friends can shoot not only on Fifth Avenue, but they can shoot in Portland and Los Angeles and Memphis and Miami and Chicago and New York, which is where Fifth Avenue is. And nothing will happen to them. Pretty powerful stuff.
It is.
So that's what competitive autocracy and authoritarianism really is. So think about it as the takeover of the body, of the framework within which it's sort of a zombie democracy. And that's where you end up. And that's what Viktor Orban had, and that's what Putin has. And That's what we have in El Salvador. Those are all zombie democracies, and they meet the definition of competitive authoritarianism.
Question, and this may or may not be something that the steady state looks at, thinks about, focuses on, but for uh, my listeners or subscribers, followers, because I get this question a lot, or sometimes it just comes in the form of a comment. Somebody's just kind of expressing themselves. It's pretty clear to most people that Donald Trump does not have the intellect to be able to strategize in terms of uh, knowing all the intricacies of how do you lay out a plan to overtake the United States government. The question is for the people who assist him with that. I'm assuming this desire to move that direction came from somewhere in some entity before there was Donald Trump in politics.
Mhm. Yeah.
Do we know anything about who those people may be and what drives them?
Yeah, we do. I will say, by the way, we talked about the scope note for that report and addressing that question. How far back does this go and where does it come from? And we decided not to. One, we'd never finish it. So let me start with the sort of one way we can look at the roots. And this is a sad thing. It is a negative aspect of American history. We've always had a lot of people that are in some ways a little uncomfortable with what we have. If there have been surveys done, if you give people the First Amendment and you don't say it's the First Amendment, the number of people who say we should not have that as a law is astounding. The number of people who don't think that we should extend civil rights to this group or the other group, to Black people, to Hispanic people. So there's a little bit of an anti-democratic stream that runs back to the founders, no question about it. And I think it probably exists in every country. Democracy is messy, frustrating. You often don't get what you want. And so you have that basis. Um, you then sort of lay on top of that um, uh, a country that's gone through huge amounts of sort of neck snapping changes, in which a lot of the anchors that people thought existed don't exist anymore. Things have just changed a lot. Computers run our lives. Um, we live much longer. We've eliminated some of the sort of de jure discrimination that we had in law discrimination. Um, it is harder to be middle class than it ever was before. Um, the food in the restaurants, on the streets, it all looks different, and it smells funny sometimes, and it doesn't look like the food that you grew up with. You hear different languages uh, uh, spoken. I was thinking about this last night. I went out to I live in right outside Washington, and there's a new soup dumpling restaurant that just opened this week. It's really good. I'm not going to buzz market them, but it was really good. And I went into it, and the variety of people in there, South Asians eating Shanghai-style soup dumplings while we looked out on the mall where the pizza place is, and on and on and on. It's a little bit disorienting. So I think that was an aspect. Um, I think that more recently, there is a strain of white nationalism and Christian nationalism that Donald Trump was able to tap into, and he's certainly animating those people. It's very explicit in what he's saying. Anti-Christian bias or anti-Christian ideas or hostility to, quote, traditional American values is actually in his most recently issued policy memorandum called National Policy Memorandum, National Security Policy Member number 7. If you don't have that, take a read of it. It's chilling. They
It
throw the
is.
word violence in there a lot, but it basically means if you don't think the way his people think, you can be investigated. And
Yes.
that's what we're seeing. So all of that contributed. And what happens, we didn't write about this, but one of the indicators you see with autocrats is almost never, at least in recent history, sort of post Hitler Mussolini, do you have the charismatic leader who on his own pulls the country along. It's constellation of people who often follow that leader, share many of the values, have self-interest. A lot of people are becoming very powerful very quickly, um, and more so than I expected here, as we develop a strain of kleptocracy, also becoming very wealthy. So there's money on the table, there's power, there's prestige. I think there is a coterie of cronies around him, uh, at OPM, at DNI, at AG. It's hard to tell who is pushing who. And you started off by saying he doesn't have the intellectual capability game out the strategy. I don't know if that's true. I don't know what his intellectual capability is. I sometimes think there isn't any, but sometimes I think that his sort of obvious ignorance about the basics on so many it's just not important to him. Um, in the way that I have, I would appear to have no intellectual capability to map out a strategy to shop for appropriate fashion and clothing for me. It's not because I'm not smart. It's because I really don't care. And so I don't want to know what color tie I'm supposed to wear. I don't care. And I don't think he cares. But he may be smart enough if he really cared about I'm not sure that when he, for instance, says that I get to control who the mayors of cities are, it all has to go through the White House. Does that show a fundamental lack of understanding of our system of federalism? Or does it, he really just doesn't care? And if he had to care, he would know. I don't know. Uh, you know, did he really understand how real estate development worked when he was doing that? Maybe, although he failed so many times. Maybe the answer there is not there either. But I don't know. He certainly knew how to run a reality television show. So,
I
you know,
yeah, I agree with you in that I think there is kind of an intuitive, unconscious cunning there.
hunning's the word.
Yes, uh, which you're right to your point. Um, Cunning and intellect can be in the same vessel, uh, but there's also a thread I think that goes between the two that separates them to the degree that I think that thread would be called intent. You know,
Yeah.
but you also stated, and I think that's the core, uh, because I think it's what drives intent is maybe just doesn't care about any of those things. And if you don't have that fundamental caring, concern, empathy, compassion, then it's real easy for your intent to always be
Yeah.
self-serving, and there it comes back to that purely cunning trait.
Yeah. I think you're right there. And I think there are two aspects that do seem demonstrated. And having said, I don't want to engage in any psychological analysis. I'm about to do it a little bit. The, I think that the apparent lack of empathy is real. So the inability of, I think a real interesting thing was when he was on the hot mic walking through the graves in France, first term,
Yes.
and he asked the question, why did these guys do this? It's at the top of the cliff, uh, at D-Day, where we lost so many and the Canadians lost so many. And I think that was a genuine question. I think it was beyond his conception of why would anyone climb up that cliff? Why did any of those guys enlist and find themselves on that beach? It made no sense to him. And I think that's what he thinks about. It's one of the things that I think was really marked in the first term and is now. I think he really could not understand, and I'm now speaking about my area of, sort of the national security world, like, these people at CIA, why are they doing what they're doing? They must be something in it for them. Like, where's the money or where's the power? And the idea that you're doing this because you're a patriot and you love your job and you love your country just doesn't make sense. And that, unfortunately, in a want to be dictator, it's sort of a superpower. Um, the constraints that come from caring about other people and what they think and understanding what they feel. I mean, you can't even care about them because you can't even put yourself in their shoes. The other thing that's interesting about him is the complete um, lack of interest in being truthful. That's a superpower. The ability and willingness to lie at any time on anything small or anything big. It's a superpower. Now, I don't know whether in his head he knows he's lying or not. But it's a nice thought experiment. I encourage your listeners to do this. Imagine what your life would be like if you really felt that you could say anything you wanted at any time, whether it was true or not, and there would really be nobody would hurt you, no consequences. I mean, it's sort of wild.
Yeah,
Like,
really.
um, and it was funny. We talked about that a little. Well, I talked with the analysts a little bit when they were writing this product, which is one of the big constraint. It wasn't the analytic tradecraft. It wasn't the root out bias, blah blah blah. All of the tradecraft things. It was, and of course, we can't put anything in here that we don't think is true. Like, imagine writing something like that. So if you don't care if it's true, Portland's burning. There was incredible violence last weekend during the No Kings rally. There have been many, many assassinations. I think Trump was talking just the other day, and he was saying people come to Washington from Iowa, they come from Missouri, they come from Louisiana, and they come and visit this city. And until I put the troops in, they go home in caskets. It's the most dangerous city in the world. They're going home in caskets. Um, like, it's not true. I mean, I'm not sure what you can say. So it's a superpower. And and by the way, a superpower that many of the other autocrats in history had. Stalin, Hitler, Mussolini, um, all a group not known for telling the truth, and a willingness to just not only tell lies, and George Orwell had it great in 1984. It's sort of the point of the book. Um, you know, you know, Famine in Ukraine? No, we've had the biggest wheat harvest we've ever had because of my wonderful 5-year plan in the tractors. No, there's no wheat.
Yeah.
Yes, there is. It's sort of so. Again, superpowers.
There's a little exercise that I will occasionally do with different people, although I've done it more with Donald Trump than anyone else. And for anyone who is curious about this process, just shoot me a message and I can tell you how to kind of walk through it. But what I do is I make various physiological shifts and kind of manipulate my physiology so that to the degree possible, I shut down as much of my internal dialogue as possible, and I just become a sensory apparatus. My eyes, ears, nose, where I'm not doing any meta thinking about the sensory input that's coming in. And what I will do is I will watch clips of Donald Trump
Hmm.
speaking where he's clearly lying, saying things like Portland's on fire. And I do that so that I can convey to people who will say, I can't believe how many people still believe him. Now, if you take the internal dialogue out of it and the meta level thinking, and you are just a sensory receptor,
Hmm.
even for someone like me, he becomes very compelling in that state. It sucks you in and it becomes very believable. One of the reasons that people can still believe him is they have much different internal dialogue than a Democrat who's been voting against him, or from somebody who has always been a Democrat. They get something much closer to what I get when I shut down internal dialogue and am just taking him in through my sensory apparatus. It's compelling. And as you know, when intense emotions and just pure factual data come into conflict,
Just win.
emotions win.
Well, you're describing an interesting thing, which is and this is almost, it may be, for all I know, physiological. It's a sort of the adrenaline endorphin hit you get. And, one of the interesting parallels, and it's fascinating because he is so into it, is professional wrestling. Everybody who's at professional wrestling knows it's not true. There's nobody, I mean, the kids, but the grown-ups in the audience, at the same time in their heads, they know those guys are lying. They're not really hitting each other with chairs or breaking their neck, whatever they do in professional wrestling. But the zing you get is real. Like watching people in mortal combat right in front of you, it's real, even though it's not real. And look, part of our whole life now is a little bit buying into that. And I do think, going back to your question about what are the roots, and I don't want to get too philosophical here, but maybe this is part of it. A large amount of our life and entertainment now is watching stuff that gives us emotional content that we know is
Absolutely.
fake. So, like, I know that, you know, there are no X-Wing fighters attacking the Death Star, but that's a pretty damn exciting scene, and my heart was going. And it still goes, 40 years after the film came out, and I know it's fake, uh, but it works, and I think there's an element of that. We've replaced, for a lot of people, what's happening here is they're getting to watch reality TV, professional wrestling, a war movie all at once. That's sort of the essence of why they rolled out I hate to say it, the executions of some poor guys in a boat, but they did it in an exciting video, which
Yes. I was
you
watching,
watch that video and,
excuse me.
um, if I hooked you up to a polygraph machine while you're watching that video, I'm betting all the needles are gonna jump, and that feels sorta good in a
It,
weird way,
it is.
and it becomes theater, not politics, and that's one of the things that Marx, and we don't talk about this in the report, but most, but not all, of the successful autocrats had mastered the theater of the falsehood, whether it's the Nuremberg rallies with Hitler, or Stalin's endless pageantry of Soviet might, expressed in so many different ways. Mussolini grasping the history of imperial Rome and making it his, all the way to Idi Amin, and uh, and uh, and Gaddafi, um, uh, and Saddam Hussein. Um, bringing theater and the theater taking over the political discourse. One of the objections that appears people seem to have had about both Obama and Biden is it wasn't fun enough to watch.
Right.
Um, it was
Right.
sort of wonky, boring stuff. Um, you know, a whole, you know, 4-year term and nobody gets indicted. What's with that? Um, no dramatic falling out. We didn't invade anybody. Um, no, but we're getting a constant stream of, and what's really interesting is his language, Trump's language, more and more echoes the sort of WWF trash talk. What he said about the president of Colombia, what he said about Maduro in Venezuela. You could just take that out, and it's like one professional wrestler screaming at the other one as right before the bat. Um, we've now exhausted my knowledge of professional wrestling, by the way. Thank um, so, you know, I think, we're seeing all of those indicators. By the way, I'd add his desire to build a triumphal arch. I mean, that, you know, back with Roman emperors, that's why you build a triumphal arch. It's the
Right.
theater of power.
Yes.
Um, and it is pleasing the masses. He's gonna have a WWF bout on the White House grounds, the ballroom. Um, I mean, I was just down at the Department of Labor. There's a 5-story high picture of him hanging off the Department of Labor right now. It's theater, and it. I looked up at it, and your heart beats a little bit faster. Mine, not exactly with happiness, but a 4-story face looking down at you.
Sure.
It has a pretty
Sure.
dramatic effect, whoever it is.
You bet. You know, you said something just a bit ago that kind of prefaced this topic that we've been talking about. You said he knows how to run a reality TV show. And I think that's exactly the frame that he sees this through. You're right. He is successful at running theater, at running a reality TV show. And when you named the things that you just did and you look at how he approaches it, you might say that what he's doing is running another successful reality TV show. I wrote an article about Joseph Campbell, not specifically about the hero's journey, but it touched on it. And in preparing to write that article, I was watching a video of an interview, I think with Bill Moyers and Joseph Campbell. And in that interview, Joseph Campbell talks about how brilliantly he thought George Lucas utilized the characters and the structure of Star Wars and how closely it modeled the hero's journey and which characters played what role. And within that is an excitement. We come back to the dopamine and the other neurotransmitters that light things up and make us feel more alive. And I think when we get down to the core, you know, there really aren't that many people in the world who are addicted to illicit drugs who don't know those drugs are bad for them.
That's true.
But the feeling they get is so intense and wonderful up to some point, and then it becomes they're just taking the drug to not feel bad, but that's still a form of pleasure because you're disconnecting from the pain. Uh, we have examples throughout history of how intelligent people can know something's bad for them, but still behave in a manner inconsistent with that because of the physiological and emotional states they are able to access. And so I think you've really landed on something there about how he lays things out like it's and the arch. Wow. I was familiar with that, but you bringing it up reminded me, boy, you talk about symbolic. Uh,
Yeah, it's
you know, as is the renovation, as he calls it, on the White House
yeah.
right now. Uh, I don't know that you can get too much more symbolic than that. That's kind of a show of ultimate power. This is the people's house. There is a process in place to make changes here. I'm not going to utilize that process because I don't have to. I'm going to tear down sections of your house.
Renaming the Department of Defense the Department of War is another similar one. And we see this throughout, and you're sort of touching on another superpower here, and this goes back to the difference between he and George Bush, which is another thing that frees you if you don't really care what the outcome of what you're doing, just whether you like doing it. The options are much wider. You can raise tariffs or lower tariffs. You can invade Venezuela or ally with Venezuela because you don't really care. You don't have a policy. Um, I know that the policy seems to have been marked by I want to fire a lot of people, except for the ones I don't want to fire. Um, but it's really freedom from. I remember my time in government. One of the things that was interesting, you sort of watch the policymakers at the White House make foreign policy. One of the things that really struck me is how constrained you are by a series of decisions you've already made, that you don't want to be in a big war. I do care about human rights. I do worry about the cost of oil. We can't do that because that will hurt this. It's all interrelated. I mean, your options for action are are constrained by reality and caring about ends. If you don't care about the ends, do anything you want. Um,
Yeah.
Whatever makes you feel. I can gut the Department of Justice because I really don't care if there's experienced prosecutors who know how to do a complicated government corruption case. I don't really care. Um, and so that it's almost a bit of a nihilism here. It's sort of
Yes.
free from anything. I could do what I want.
And
I'm sure it's impossible.
I think you're right. Although I'm sure a lot of people bristle when they hear it spoken about like that. But I think you are right. You are accurate in calling it a superpower because we've got this sense of we don't want to say anything or attribute anything to Donald Trump that has any kind of feeling of giving him recognition or acknowledging power. But I think to approach things in the way that we need to continue approaching them, we have to avoid that because it will preclude the truth.
Right.
Uh, you know,
Which is our superpower, by the way.
yes,
There's
yes,
our superpower, uh,
yes,
and we can't give it up. And you know, I think Winston Churchill would have laughed at you if you'd say, we really shouldn't talk about the Luftwaffe as being a credible air force. He would have said, they're a really credible air force.
yes,
That's why we're going to fight on the beaches and fight in the air.
right,
There really is a Germany, and it really is dangerous. And they do have superpowers. We just have superpowers of our own, and
yes.
we gotta we gotta get ours in gear. And that's, I think we've come almost a full circle here, which is the report is designed to inform people of the reality of what we're seeing. The superpowers may be there or not, but our superpower, and we still have it, is our ability to teach each other, to talk to each other, our ability to put aside policy differences that we had in more normal times and make alliances, which I want to sort of leave you with that. I know we're getting a little past your time on this, but
No, that's fine.
I wanted to leave you with a couple of things and a couple of asks here.
Yes,
One, we're really trying to reach out to a younger demographic. We've started a program of visiting colleges and universities. Um, Happy to come out to Missouri. Um,
nice.
and talk to students. We just started around 6 weeks ago. Very interesting. I had done some college talks before. Um, we spoke at Yale. We spoke at Vassar College, at Bard College. We're hopefully speaking at University of Richmond in a couple of weeks.
Nice.
Davidson, but we'd love to get out into the Midwest, and they don't have to be Eastern private colleges.
Yeah.
But what was really interesting is and my message to the students was the same message I'm giving now, which is existential threat. You should be scared. In the past, you show up at a college and you say, "Hi, I'm a former CIA officer." You get a bunch of people booing you. And then the first question is sort of like, "Are you a baby killer or you just want to be a baby killer?" Um, and there was none of that. It was a room full of really smart, scared kids. And they want to know what to do. They want the grown-ups to come to the table. And I think they're ready to put aside some of the policy differences that tore apart our campuses last year I sort of joked and I said, "Look, I know what went on here at all these schools. I had 2 kids at Columbia University. I know exactly what went on." I said, you guys gotta shake hands across the divide so you can get back to fighting. Because if you don't save this, you're not gonna be having any of these demonstrations on either side anymore.
Right.
I I you know, you will be living in a country where you don't do this. You will be living in a country where you don't get to march around the campus and yell at the students who are marching around the campus that you disagree with. Not to diminish how important those issues. They're really important issues. Democracy is built to fight out those issues. That's why we do all this stuff. But if we lose a democracy, the issues don't matter anymore. All that matters is what the people in charge want to do. And you don't matter anymore. And that really is our superpower. Americans want to matter.
Yes.
But anything you or your listeners could do to help us extend our reach to college campuses, I will tell you, I looked at our Twitter demographics. Pretty much 80% of our followers are over 65 years old.
Stephen, it's funny you say that because that tends to be the case with my subscribers, my followers, my listeners, and I'm glad you mentioned that you're going the way of TikTok. That's one place I've not really stuck my toe into the waters with yet, but I realize that in order to tap into that younger demographic, it's something I need to consider.
Well, we've pulled. I've done. I think I've done 6 or 7 of them. I think I'm going to do one tomorrow morning. I'm not comfortable doing it yet. I'll tell you that. I don't. My kids are laughing at me.
Yeah.
Um, but it is hard. So here's my ask for of you. One, here's the most important ask. You got to keep doing what you're doing. Um, the one of the superpowers is you and people like you, because it's harder and harder for the New York Times and the Washington Post to keep people informed. We're looking to people like you doing a podcast, um, who are talking to people at a little bit more of a retail level, although it's not quite retail. Um, and I know, and the pressure you're under, and it's going to get worse. And so we need you. To use Intel jargon, I keep liking to do the Intel jargon. And I'll have to give one piece because there's always a bee in my bonnet, and it's almost non sequitur, but I'll come to it in a second. In our world, the people who get the analysis, the information out, there's something called the intelligence cycle: collection, analysis, dissemination, requirements. Requirements are what do I need to know? Collection is getting the data. Analysis is putting it into a form that can be used. Disseminating is getting it out. You're that last piece on that circle. You're the disseminator. Autocrats break the disseminators. Don't let them break you. And you and your colleagues in the world of journalism and the media. So that's ask number one. Here's my throwaway. CIA agents don't exist. People who work for the CIA are officers. The people they recruit, the foreign people they recruit, are their agents. It's the exact opposite of the FBI, where the agent works for the FBI. Drives me nuts. New York Times gets it wrong all the time and call people like me former CIA agents. I was not a CIA agent. And none of the steady state members were CIA agents. The CIA people were officers, and
Right.
officers are both collectors and analysts and support. They're all officers. Okay, there. Second ask is, I talked about it before. Please help us get that report out, get our letters out. We're doing a lot of letters to Congress. I don't know if they're read, but I can tell you, I'll give you a little insight from somebody who was a staffer. You think, oh, they don't care. I'm just talking to a staffer. I'm talking to a junior staffer, and you're talking to a really junior staff. They do care. Here's what happens when you call your senator's office. Some poor kid who's an intern picks up the phone. You're like the 50th call that person's taken. Half of them are screaming at him. It's a really, really hard job. And they're going to say something like, are you a constituent? That's the first thing. They need to know that you live in the state, because you're not going to pay attention if you don't. Then they're going to say, what would you like me to tell the senator, or something along those lines? And then you say whatever it is you want, but you should have some talking points in front of you. We put up on ours, I think you disseminated it, sort of how to do this. You know, my name is so and so. I live in this town, and I want the senator to know about X, and I want her or him to do the following. Please make sure the senator knows. Thank you very much. Don't yell at the poor kid. He's 17 years old. But here's what happens. He has a chart in front of them. They know all the questions that are coming in with, you know, they're going to get 5,000 phone calls a day. 1,000 of them are going to be about this issue. 1,000 will be about inflation. 1,000 will be blah, 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 whatever it is. And often something involving the state. They're filling it out. Person wants you to do X. And if they do it right, they have actually little check boxes. They collate that at the end of the day. Same with the letters. Most senators and representatives, they want that put into a sheet at the end of the day that tabulates it all. And they really care about that. So they may not hear you, they're hearing the numbers. So when I worked for Senator Feinstein, she would often say something along like, oh, we got a lot of calls about X. How did they play out? Well, Senator, 90% of them wanted you to vote this way and were very upset, blah, blah, say they were very upset. And she'd think about that. Sometimes, and I think they all do this, when you write a letter, two things can happen. Well, and I used to do this when I was her chief counsel. If there was a letter that really made sense and hit home, I'd put a little memo on it. Senator, I think you should read this letter. And it would go home with her. She took this, Senator Feinstein took this huge bag full of paper, and she read it all. And I know she read it all because she would mark on it with a magic marker, with a pen, and it would be back on my desk the next morning at 8 o'clock.
Yeah.
Steve, follow up on this. This is interesting. Want to know more. Like, uh-oh, got my work cut out for me now. I don't know my schedule. They're all doing that. They really do care when you call and you write. It's hard to imagine, but they do care. So please, please, please do that.
I think that's a valuable topic that you address right there, because I think, as you know, so many people feel right now that no one cares and that no one listens. And I've never had the sense that that's the case, because even if it's as so many things with human behavior are, even if it's just self-serving, even if they only care because of whether they're going to get elected again or what, we have leverage. We are able to influence things to certain degrees in either way. And that assumption that nobody cares just means we have now weakened our ability to do that, because
there's another superpower. There we are. We're an elective democracy. Voters really matter. It's just hard to tell sometimes because there's so many of us. So you never know whether yours is the one. So finally, I just ask people, follow us, feel free to write us. We are thinking, and actually, I'm going to put you on the spot, Jack. We've thought about doing a sort of Ask Me Anything live on either Twitter or we tried it once or twice. I don't think I did it very well. Again, I always need technical help. But we're thinking about that. I don't know if it's manageable, but certainly we would love to hear from people, and it really matters. I got to tell you, it matters when we get notes from people. I read your thing, that really keeps us going. We're an all volunteer organization except me. It's like caffeine in the morning is hearing from people who read our stuff.
Listen, anything that and not only just with this, anything that I can do to help you, all you have to do is ask, and
we will.
Yeah.
And I'd love to get some more of our members with different perspectives.
Yes.
And we'll do that.
That would be great.
But Jack, I really want to thank you for having me back on, and more importantly for everything you're doing.
Well, thank you. Listen, something about this second podcast episode that you and I have done. I can think of nothing in this episode that you had covered the first time. I mean, it's new content, it's fresh, new stuff, and I think that's a clear signal of how forward moving the steady state is. They're not just stuck on one thing. They are evolving with what's happening as it's happening, and this episode is a reflection of that.
Well, I appreciate it. And now, having almost ended, I'm now going to throw one more stuff out, which
Yeah.
I think will give people a little bit of a positive feel. One of the dictators that many of us have thought about is, I've mentioned him, Slobodan Milosevic, in which his superpowers were overcome by the superpowers of a real amalgamation of the old, the young, the sort of the radical, the conservative. There's a fabulous documentary. It's 50 minutes long. It's called Bringing Down a Dictator, or Taking Down a Dictator. It's narrated by Martin Sheen of West Wing. So it's like having the president there.
That
And it sort of charts how a coalition, largely led by students, an organization called Otpor, takes down Slobodan Milosevic. Now, can't get confused, because it ends, I'm not giving away, no spoiler here, with a march on the Capitol. But it's the reverse of ours. In their march, it was the dictator who was holding out, and they turn it around non-violently, through putting aside differences. There's some great moments where these various factions in Serbian history, who had been beating the hell out of each other for probably decades,
right.
sort of say, okay, we really got to come together, or this is over. And Serbia is still by any means not perfect, but they got out from under a dictator. It's doable. It takes the superpower of the people. So with that, Jack, thank you so much for having me on, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you, Stephen. It was a pleasure.
Yep. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now.